Families are put together a lot of different ways these days, and it's important to be clear what the terminology is. Egg donation is very similar to what most people understand with sperm donation. It's for a couple in which the one partner's eggs cannot be used. Another person, another woman, volunteers to have her ovaries stimulated and her eggs retrieved, and those eggs are what is given to the recipient. So it is the recipient in general who is the one carrying the pregnancy, and then becomes the mom. When you're doing egg donation, you have two women involved. You've got the egg donor, you've got the recipient. The recipient, her part is really to have her uterus prepared to receive these embryos. So she is going through a series of steps, generally first shutting down her cycle so then the doctors can then add back all the different hormones they want to at the appropriate time. And so after shutting down, then the add back begins. So she's taking the hormones of pregnancy, estrogen and progesterone, in preparation to get the lining of her uterus ready to receive the embryos. In the meantime, you've got the egg donor getting herself ready, and what we're doing first is usually shutting down her cycle so that to get her ready to let her ovaries produce multiple eggs. Normally in the menstrual cycle, a woman's going to produce one egg. The idea with egg donation is to try to make that a little more efficient and get her to produce a lot of eggs. So she then takes, we basically get the egg donor and the recipient up to the same starting line in the cycle, and then we get the egg donor starting to stimulate her ovaries by taking various hormonal medications to signal to the ovaries to produce those multiple eggs. Once the eggs are retrieved, then they are inseminated with the recipient partner's sperm, and then watch and see which eggs fertilize, which go on to develop. And once they go on to develop, those resulting embryos, which are usually anywhere from about a 4 to a 10 cell embryo, are transferred to the recipient's uterus, which, as we already talked about, was prepared to receive those embryos. With gestational surrogacy or gestational carrier, there are a number of different terminologies. Those are the two that are being used most of the time these days. We tend to use gestational carrier here just simply because originally when the term surrogacy was used, it really only meant what we call traditional surrogacy, in which the surrogate, the woman, was inseminated with the intended father's sperm, and she was the one who carried the pregnancy, but she was also the genetically related to the child. It was her egg that was being involved. And then in the 80s, people started doing this gestational carrier, gestational surrogacy, and that was intended for couples in which the woman was unable to carry the pregnancy due to medical reasons. And so they would go through the process of in vitro fertilization, and when the eggs and the sperm were put together and became embryos, instead of transferring the embryos back to the genetic mother's uterus, actually was another woman who actually had the transfer, and she just stated she had the pregnancy and delivered the baby, and the baby went back to his or her genetic parents. So that's why the distinction came up between using the term surrogacy and gestational surrogacy or gestational carrier. I think the patients that are going to consider sperm donation are the ones in which the male partner really it's very clear that he cannot contribute to the pregnancy. Either he doesn't have sperm, or any intervention would require a lot of assisted reproductive technology intervention, and that's not either financially feasible or feasible for another reason, or just that they want to avoid having that high-tech intervention. Also, the other people who would use donor sperm would also be single women and same-sex lesbian couples. Embryo donation is usually done these days with embryos that are excess embryos from an IVF cycle that an individual couple has gone through. They have completed their family and say, gee, I need to do something with the disposition of these embryos. What am I going to do with these embryos? And they really have three choices for the most part. They can thaw the embryos, let them naturally degenerate. They can donate those embryos to the lab for training or research purposes. And the third option is donating them to another couple. from a medical point of view, it's a very easy process. The embryos are already created. You just prepare the recipient's uterus, you transfer the embryos. Out of all of our programs, that's probably the easiest one that we have to offer from a medical point of view. These are all variations on the same theme when we talk about egg donation or gestational surrogacy. I mean, the whole idea is having the two major players in this whole process: how we get the eggs and where the eggs go. So it's the eggs and the uterus.